data. So we're here to talk about data activation and management and kind of why it's so important in a world where data is kind of the most important currency. We actually heard Carla from Product Madness talk about it as being gold. Their data is their gold. That's how important it is. In a world that's becoming more important but also more fragile, how do publishers and marketers kind of make the most of it and really ensure they're getting the most from it, not just because of what they're being told to do, but because of what, we've never heard the word consumer so much in one day at any ATS event before, which is great, because of what the consumer wants us to do with their data and how they want us to talk to them. So before we kick off, I'm going to start with a brief round of intros. Marika, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. My name is Marika Georgieva. I lead the Customer Success Managers team at Primitive, where we work with publishers and first-party data owners, helping them make the most out of their first-party data.
Brilliant, thank you. Femi?
Hi, everyone. My name is Femi Taiwo. I head up consultancy for Europe for an agency called Assembly. My job is basically helping our clients navigate in-house data ownership, data strategy, and international expansion.
Hi, I'm Kamara, and I look after digital transformation and marketing effectiveness at Zenith.
Hi everyone, my name is Paul Hood. I work for News UK, and specifically I'm Business Planning Director for The Sun.
Thank you very much. So before we kick off, can I find out why the timer isn't working, Rachel? Thank you very much. Just so I don't overrun. Don't want to keep people from beer and cycling, of course. I want to understand, before we get into kind of data management activation, I want to understand kind of what a data infrastructure is and should be and look like. And from a publisher and a marketer perspective, how brands and publishers are organising themselves and understanding how that feeds into data strategy more generally. So Paul, I'm going to come to you first, as to kind of, from what you're doing at The Sun, at News, kind of what data infrastructure looks like and what the considerations are for you guys.
Sure, so for The Sun, we've actually been on quite an interesting journey over the last 3 years, where people will remember that The Sun originally started out digitally behind a paywall, and that decision was reversed in 2015. And then we had a strategy, three pillars to our strategy. So grow, know, and monetize. And the idea being that we wanted to make sure that we got The Sun back to being the #1 news media brand in the country. For many years, The Sun has been the best-selling newspaper in the country, but actually digitally, we were behind the game because we'd had much of our content behind a paywall. So for the last 3 years, we've really focused on getting The Sun brand back to #1. And actually, this year, we've achieved that. So under editor Victoria Newton, The Sun has become a very relevant part of everybody's daily news life. And actually, according to PAMCO, figures just released last week, we are now the #1 news media brand. And the reason I say that is it's really important for us to have this scale so that we can then start to profile and segment our audiences. And of course, within that, start to understand where the high-value cohorts are. And to your question directly, organize ourselves so that we can start to make the most of that audience data. And actually, there'll be people on the panel sort of better positioned than me to talk about the tech element of how do we organize that data. But I think one of the things that is also worth kind of mentioning is that it isn't just about the tech, and we're really clear that actually the value lies in the activation. And so each day The Sun writes around 600 stories for the website.
And 600 a day.
600 a day.
That's bananas.
It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what we're really focused on is trying to understand how people engage with those stories. So some of them are, of course, top of funnel. So people are just coming along, snacking on the content, might be entertainment, and then they're gone. Some of them, obviously, much deeper pieces. But what we are always trying to do through the funnel is to try and identify where those engagement points are and where we can jump people off into a more valuable transaction. And later on, perhaps I can talk about some of the things that we're doing and actually the high-value transactions that we manage to get our audience to engage with. But actually, I think the infrastructure that we talk about is really about understanding the context and the intent that people come to us for so that we can then serve them the next best, most relevant piece of content so they continue to engage with us.
Brilliant. There's a lot to unpick there, but one thing you obviously talked about was the tech part of that. A great segue, Marika, over to you in terms of, from Permitive's perspective, how you are helping your clients understand what a data infrastructure looks like, and obviously you guys are privacy by design, how the privacy aspect and the considerations we just talked about come into play when you're working with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we talk about what infrastructure is, Paul kind of mentioned the tech element, and that's really it. It's an element. It's meant to be an enabler. That's what your infrastructure is meant to be, not an intermediary of what you're trying to do. Permitive, and we at Permitive believe that your technology should be there for you as a publisher or marketer, first-party data owner, to build on and to enable you to find what really helps you stand out in the market, and to bring that to life while respecting your users and respecting their privacy and data security. And what this means in practice for us at Permitive is building technology which has privacy at its core. Our technology is built with privacy in mind, with one of our core design principles. For us, this is not an afterthought. What we'd like to ensure is that by investing in Permitive, all of our customers are already making a very good decision for the privacy and data security of their users, and that they're free to think about all the fantastic content that they bring to life, how they can bring that content to users the best way, how they can monetize their data in a way that's going to bring them the most value in market, rather than thinking about all the workarounds and things that they need to put in place to think about privacy. No, this is what happens at the core, and then the publisher or marketer is free to build on that using our technology.
Very interesting. And Femi, from your perspective and where you sit in the industry, how, I know you've got a lot of strong opinions on this area of the ecosystem, which I'm very excited to hear, and I'm sure our audience will be as well. But I want to understand, obviously, same question about data infrastructure, but also kind of what a coherent data and activation and management strategy actually looks like, and how that's evolved with regulation, with advancements in technology, but also, of course, with what's been happening with the walled gardens recently.
Yes, I think from my end, I have to manage a tension internally where we've got JBPs with Google, with Facebook, with the other platforms, and I have to give an honest recommendation to my clients as part of their structure. So it generally goes down sort of two routes, which is, if you're going to go all in on Google, we'll help you with that, and here's what that looks like, and my team will do the necessary resale and everything else. If you're going to fragment your ecosystem, don't be half-assed about it. Go all out, fragment properly, fragment with the right silos in place, right? So analytics, make it Adobe if you want to make it, but know that these things are, you're going to have these consequences as a result, right? So you're going to lose data in this way, and that's almost our recommendation. Now, what we then have to do is communicate that back out to the activation teams, right? This is going to be a problem for you because the client's made the decision, right? Find the way to work around it. And so, like most other agencies, we have proprietary tools and proprietary tech. The only difference is that ours are more around enablement rather than trying to sell a data solution. Our proprietary tech is about making sure that we don't make silly governance mistakes that cost us tens of thousands by the time someone's worked it out. So in that sense, we're relatively safe, so to speak, because we're not recommending to our clients buy our tech because it's going to give us more data. We don't care, to be blunt about it. But it's very much about helping our clients understand that there are consequences for all your actions. We know that Google's going to protect itself, and even if it gets broken up, right, GMP is going to work as it needs to, right, and it's going to always work on Google's own operated properties. But as long as you're comfortable with that, then let's proceed. And if you're not, then here's some options for you to think about internally. Again, because my money's made by doing a consulting effort, will help you to evaluate, put together rigorous scorecards around everything else, and then you can decide appropriately.
So go in with your eyes wide open is your recommendation. Yeah, absolutely. And Alice, from your perspective in your role, how does that affect the media effectiveness piece in terms of how the clients you work with are looking at data, understanding data, and how that's evolved over the past couple of years with so much that's been happening in the industry?
Yeah, I think especially around infrastructure, it's really important to understand the data that's going in, that you're storing, how long you can store it for, what it looks like. Things like taxonomies sound really boring, but unless you understand what all this data is, then you really can't do anything with it. In the first instance, how are you learning from it? What kind of strategies are you building out? And then how are you targeting people as a result? So are you using your first-party data? Are you relying on publisher data? Are you relying on platform data? And then how does that campaign data feed back in? So until you, and I like the way you're saying coherent data strategy, because if you can't explain it internally to stakeholders at a senior level who probably don't have the same level of data literacy as a lot of people who are doing the grunt work, it's really difficult to get them on board with that strategy and the rollout of infrastructure. And personally, in marketing effectiveness and measurement, the way that I find it really easy or easier to explain those things is through measurement and tests and demonstrating whether it's cost saving, growth, revenue, and if you can unpair that from the sort of techie language, then you can get far many more people on board on their journey.
And so you are almost that translator, are you, between, I guess, the attribution, the econometrics team and the client, trying to say, this is what your data is and looks like, and this is how it's working and why it's working?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been loads of conversations today about the right data sources to use. And there's lots of different opinions about the right thing, and I really think that it's a brand by brand decision, depending on what you're trying to do with, in our example, marketing. And if you get to a point where there's more often not too many data sources and too much information, what is important, what is the thing you're meant to be looking at. So if you can try and take a step back and look at the entire picture where it is possible and try and draw understanding from that, that's where you're going to start to learn and be able to scale. But they were talking earlier about sort of following click-through rates. If you get yourself muddled into that, then there's very little that you're going to learn or do. Like, we all know where the money's going to go. So if you are able to unpair those strategies and go back to, in all honesty, like, what is the business case? What are we trying to achieve for this brand or this client? And whether those metrics are actually laddering up to that or not. Because if they're not, then what are you doing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And Paul, I'm interested in your perspective of this from the publisher side as well, because we talked a lot today about the publisher is almost having its day again. It's come up from almost every panel from the first to the current one. And it's not about the publisher striking back, but actually the publisher being able to take back ownership of its data and be able to rebuild the relationships it may have lost with advertisers. And you guys have got a fascinating first-party data strategy in terms of what you're doing at The Sun, in terms of how you get it and how you use it to understand your customer base and then what you do with it. How do you think that will help bring the two sides of the coin, each end of the supply chain closer together?
I think just building on what Alice has said, we are really focused on trying to simplify the language and make our data kind of actionable. So at News UK, our commercial team have developed a really clear identity framework, which, first of all, again, we communicate that internally, but we also communicate it externally to advertisers and agencies. So we've got 4 states of identity. So we've got unconsented, unknown, identifier present, and then soft login. And then obviously right at the top of the funnel, we've got a registration. So soft login is kind of an interesting area for us because it's where people have given us a name and email address in order to engage what we would call in a kind of quite light touch way. So they may have entered a competition on The Sun. It doesn't mean they're necessarily wanting to sign up to Sun newsletters or become more deeply engaged with The Sun, but they're happy to have given us a name and email address to engage with one particular content area. And then obviously right at the top, we've got what we would see as the most valuable cohort, registered users, people who are really happy to kind of be fully signed in and signed up to a Sun product, whether that's Sun Bingo or Holidays from 950. And so all the way through that funnel again, if you like, our job is to try and identify readers and kind of move them up and across into states that, we've got their permission, first of all, and then we've got permission to put advertising in front of them, relevant advertising, and then ultimately we've got the permission to transact with them across our own estate of products and services. So I think that's how we try and activate the data, by keeping it quite simple, by keeping it by assigning our readers an identity state, one of those 5 identity states, and then by being really clear about the permissions that we have, what we know about them, and in order to then try and put the right next best piece of content in front of them.
That's interesting. And so, from Morika, from your perspective, in terms of how you're working with publishers, like you've heard, obviously, Sun have got a very interesting strategy when it comes to first-party data. Where's you guys? Congratulations, round C, $75 million. So there's obviously a lot of innovation coming from somewhere in terms of Impermeative. How are you working with the likes of the Sun to kind of help them deliver, help them be able to understand how they can capture this first-party data? Paul just mentioned some really interesting ways that they've got, like the different steps they have to data. Where do Permeative come in helping them innovate and grow that further and do the most they can with it?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. It's a very exciting step for us. I think what Paul is kind of mentioning is fantastic, and it's probably doing the right way and looking at their whole suite of data and deciding how each of the different types of data that they have would fit down as they work with marketers. So I guess a couple of questions to unpack there. Firstly, where does innovation come from? Now, in a world without third-party cookies, in a world where privacy is so important, innovation has to come from the players that look at privacy and recognize privacy as a core design principle and as a core way to run their business, if you wish. And really at Permeative, we keep saying that we're on a mission to rebuild data and advertising to protect privacy, and it really is true. Like, everyone at our company kind of makes decisions with that core principle in mind, and we also try to kind of work with our publishers to help them build strategies that can help them take their first-party data to market in a way that respects privacy but also does not sacrifice revenue. So what does this mean? One of the key things that we kind of see about first-party data is this widespread thought that first-party data is behavioral identified, behavioral authenticated data only, which it is, but it's also so much more than that. So your first-party data includes things, yes, what people are reading, but how long they're reading it for, what they're clicking on, how are they interacting with the rest, with any rich media on your site. Are you asking them questions, surveys on your site? We heard about like the dreaded panels, but what if we bring those and we make them part of the experience, we make them something that your users actually want to engage with. So there's so much data out there that publishers need to sit down and kind of think about and decide, okay, what is the really valuable part of my data that I'm collecting, but maybe I'm not putting to good use right now. So that's the first step. Then the second one is kind of think about how this can be packaged in a way that really plays to your strength. So every single publisher out there is probably going to be strong in a slightly different areas than the others. As a publisher, have you identified this? And have you really thought about how you can bring this very easily to an advertiser to help them make good targeting decisions and to help them transact in a very quick way? And the third, and I think very important point, and I love kind of what Paul was referring to there, is that yes, authenticated data is great and it's really, really important, but it's not a silver bullet. And we're never going to be in a position where there's enough out of the web out there that's authenticated for us to transact confidently on. Like, we're really starting to think that the days of one-to-one targeting are nearing their end, and publishers need to find a way to, yes, collect authenticated data, but then to model out and gain an understanding of the rest of their unauthenticated data so that they can offer advertisers paths into it. And that's really a core thing of what we're trying to kind of preach out there and to help publishers do in order to really make the most of their new digital currency, which is their data.
That's fascinating. And from how, looking at publishers working with advertisers in more detail, Femi, from your perspective, your clients, brands must be suffering from data deprecation. They must be looking at, what the hell do I do now? I used to have access to so much, and now I don't know how to target. Morika just talked about, looking at the unauthenticated web, and I guess there's an element of passerby traffic to that. How can your brands target that traffic still from a publisher perspective? How can they work with brands like the Sun to try and get access to that first-party data? How are brands tackling this? And do they feel a bit lost and dazed and confused at the moment?
I think over the past 18 months or so, a lot of brands have obviously seen the signs on the wall, and they've started building out their own first-party CRM data, right? What we've seen is that a lot of them, their CRM teams are now probably more important than they were 2 years ago, which is good. What we're starting to advise them on, and the greatest credit I can give to the Google business right now, is that they gave us this understanding of how cohorts can work at scale, right? And that, for me, I think is a gold mine for us to be able to work our way through. So we advise our clients effectively on two levels. The first is being able to take what is your CRM data, take the headers and convert those headers into cohorts, right? So for example, I'm Femi, I'm male, I'm a dad, I'm black, take all these different things you know about me. I've shopped in this particular location, I live in this particular postcode, and then reverse engineer them into anonymous concepts, right? So therefore, I sit within a cohort of fathers, or I'm an NFL fan, so I sit in a cohort of NFL fans, right? And that becomes your audience insights and the targeting that you then use to engage with publishers. So you say that I want to, can you match or give me a scaled audience of NFL fans who are dads, right? And that becomes how you exchange and have that conversation, which takes away the need to have an ID match, right? Because that's not going to be scalable. It also takes away the need to integrate with too many data bunkers, as it were, because again, that's a piece of technical work you're going to have the resource for. Now, at the secondary level, and this is a much bigger, longer conversation, I've got half a thesis written on this stuff, right, is this idea of understanding human behavior and the concept of cohorts, right? So as an NFL fan, I'm active as a fan between September and February, which is when the season runs. I'm not a super fan, right? Otherwise, I'll be active in April when the draft is. But understanding how long I stay in a cohort for is really important to understand what message to give me at that point in time, right? And so we're still playing about internally this concept of a cohort migration rate, right? And then using that as a test to work out how brands can then apply a coefficient to their advertising. So the long and short is that I will pay X amount more when you're in season, right, for this particular group of cohorts than when you're out of season, in which case they don't become invaluable, but they get different messaging at a lower rate. And that almost plays the natural tendency we all have. We do different things at different times, right? So it's not that you're not open to advertising at that point in time, but it just needs to go into a different part of the funnel. And so for us, we then underpin that with the stuff that Alice is really good at, which is the marketing effectiveness work, which is looking at the long-term brand health and all those kind of things. And it's that holistic suite is pretty much how we package it and say to our brands, engage with publishers, ask them these questions, right? But fundamentally work from your CRM audiences rolled up to a higher level and then ask them, do you have the audiences to match these?
So it's fascinating, right? Because it's long been agreed. The consensus generally is that Google should never have owned the cohort. It should be owned, long debated at the publisher level, actually, not owned by any walled garden. But what you're saying is you're actually encouraging the marketers to create their own cohorts, and with the first-party data they've already obviously got access to, and almost become, I guess, their own first-party publisher, which is something we talked about again earlier. That's really interesting. And how then would that tie together with? I mean, Alice, actually, from your perspective, the marketing effectiveness piece, you guys have got Epsilon as well, which helps with the ID conversation of this. How does that, how much data does a marketer need to have to make those cohorts effective? And how can you actually help a marketer manage that? That seems like a bit of a minefield for them. You talked about, it's one thing saying that you're an NFL fan, it's another thing saying, but only pay more for me during these months because that's when I'm actually active. Are marketers ready for this kind of stuff?
I mean, Alice will answer a bit more, but I think they are. I think that most of them understand it. I mean, right now, a lot of our clients, like 80% of our retail clients, right, and luxury fashion, we're in peak period, right? They understand the concept of you get a groundswell of people engaged in these kind of activities at certain times of the year. So for a lot of our clients, the concept of I move or I ebb and flow is a very natural thing to their business anyway. They see it in their sales volume, they see it in their inventory, they see it in their supply chain. So for us explaining this to them, it actually makes a lot of sense, and it makes it easy to have a conversation with a CFO or with an inventory manager because they get it anyway. I don't know if it scales across all other types of brands, but I know specifically in retail and those who are very data-driven, absolutely they get it.
Alice, theoretically and obviously practically, this must be a fascinating approach to be able to look at data and look at the effectiveness of it.
Yeah, I think just building on what you said from two perspectives, your first-party data and knowing, for example, when someone has made a purchase or they've performed an action that would put them into a cohort that you would then maybe ignore them for a certain amount of time is a really interesting prospect, because then you can also, to add onto what you've said, understand things like frequency of purchase. So when does that person then become, again, very important, and how can you learn from those signals building up over time, and how that funnels into your sort of ROI bottom line numbers. So that's definitely very important. But also from a top-down perspective, it's really important to go back to like the strategy and the business objectives that you started off with. And what we see a lot of is, so for example, you were saying about NFL, but if you were to broaden out to say, for example, we were doing something around home ownership recently. So for our brands, home ownership is a real indicator that you're more likely to buy. Brilliant. How do you go about targeting that? Well, you could go into some platform data and they can give you some cohort information, for example, all based on their analogy and their methodology of how people fit into these groups. But it's also a real opportunity for creativity. How could you go about finding that data yourself? Actually, is it about getting postcodes from the Office of National Statistics and modelling out yourself those kinds of areas where people are more likely to own a home, and then put that into the system? And then you can quite easily compare those two pieces of data, or those two strategies rather, and determine which one is giving you a bigger uplift. So what is the best way to be targeting your data, targeting your audience? I think that this whole rug being pulled out from underneath us is certainly making us all panic and making us all focus on first-party data. But there are so many other things out there and so many clever ways that we can reach our audience that we need to be following. And it's also, we need to be really wary about reducing our scale when we're marketing, because all of the marketing effectiveness theory is all about marketing to the masses. You need to not ignore an audience just because you have data on someone else over here. So it's really taking that macro view of a complete audience base and testing around whether that actually is giving you the ROI. Is it more expensive to buy this audience than it is to actually get the right return from them, and playing with those kind of levers, really.
That's really interesting, and I guess that ties well in with there's the old just because you can doesn't mean you should, and brands have access and publishers have access to all this data. What do I do with it? There's so much and actually, Alice, you and I had a great chat about it, and you gave some examples about some of your clients that see some really random stuff that you got from Amazon, some data you got from Amazon sales, and they look at that and go, oh, our toilet paper clients are massive sci-fi fans. Let's do something with that. It's like, no, you really shouldn't.
Yeah, you have to really be very careful about working with the statistically relevant and scalable groups of people. And there's fantastic insight that you can get from places like, in this example, it was Amazon's data that you can get off the back of marketing. But should you be following that into a rabbit hole? Well, not unless there's a real business case for it, no. So yeah, you have to be really careful about going, right, oh, well, that's it. This is our new target audience, and making sure that you are consistently taking a step back and seeing that whole picture.
And I'm the term business case is interesting in the sense that it ties in with another big topic is data ethics. And again, we talked about the consumer, the human behind the ad that or behind the content we're reading. How has data ethics, what role is data ethics and this kind of understanding of what a consumer wants from us, and them taking control of their own privacy, and the consumer has had more control than it's ever had before. How is, from the publisher perspective, how are you working with that with your consumers and helping them understand how they're in control of their own destiny, if you like, when it comes to them using your site, for example, using the Sun? And from a brand perspective, is data ethics playing a role in them trying to understand and rework their data strategy? Come to you first, Paul, on that one. Lots of garbled questions there. Hopefully it will make sense. Who knows? It's been a long day.
Yeah, I think for us it goes back to our identity framework and understanding what levels of consent we have. I think it's really important that we give the customer that choice. If they opt out of all cookies on entry to our site, then we put them in the unconsented bucket and we treat them with respect, and we respect those choices they've made. On their journey, they may want to engage with a Sun product or another, and at that point we will ask them for some information, and if they give it, then we'll move them into a different bucket. So I think we as a publishing business, of course, want to make sure that we're putting the controls in the hands of the customer. I think the other thing, though, is it isn't just about the data as such. It is about this declared intent, because I think that adds a really important layer of relevance to the data. So, Femi's an NFL fan. He's active between September and February. Actually, it isn't just that data that we would use. We might put content in front of Femi about NFL, and we might be able to stimulate him in April or June or whenever. And so I think, and perhaps I'm bound to say it as a publisher, but content actually has a very powerful influence to be able to add a layer of relevance to existing data. And then to Alice's point around the kind of ephemeral nature of data, it really does change quickly. So marketers will be gearing up for Black Friday and they'll be thinking about all of the data points they have. Am I about to buy a TV or a toothbrush or whatever? I don't know. they can guess based on the data they have about me. But actually, if we write about, X, Y, or Z, we can influence. It's that content and the context and the data added together that really creates a powerful, informed, objective view of that customer and what their intent is likely to be. So I think, another example would be the Sun does a holidays from £9.50, which has been something that we've done as a promotion every January for 30 years. Now, January isn't actually all the time of the highest bookings in the domestic holiday market, but it is for Sun readers because they know, we have trained them, that we have this fantastic best in market offer to take your family on an affordable UK holiday park for £9.50 per person. And actually, it's our content around that time, along with the kind of trained behaviour, if you like, and of course the data, but it's actually the content and the promotion that drives, upwards of 300,000 people to book a holiday through the Sun, making us actually the UK's biggest domestic travel agent, strangely. But I think we couldn't just do that on historical data. We couldn't just look at last year's January holiday bookings and say, we'll profile these people, we'll kind of, try and figure out a little bit more as they interact with us through the year, and then we'll use, CRM and social media to reach them. The content plays a really important role as well.
Absolutely, like I said, we are running out of time, but Morika, I wanted to come to you quickly as well, kind of on data ethics conversation. Obviously, Permit is privacy first, so your clients aren't kind of necessarily requesting anything around data ethics from you, but are you seeing it become more of a feature of the publishers you work with, come more of almost like one of their pillars, one of their most important goals when it comes to understanding and being able to really make the most of their data actually ethically with the consumer front of mind?
Yes, the answer to the question is a definite yes. And I think it's very interesting when we look at the world where we are right now and kind of how the privacy landscape is shaping. A couple of months ago, we heard kind of from Google that they were delaying the deprecation of the cookie. And at that point, we kind of saw the ecosystem splitting into two kind of groups. We saw some players in the ecosystem or some people who were kind of waiting to see how the market's going to go and kind of they're going to go in the same direction. There are others that think that a third-party cookie replication is going to come out magically out of somewhere, and then there's third ones that think that big tech is going to solve the problem as usual and just waiting for that saving grace to happen. And then there's this other group, like Paul and like all of the other publishers that we've seen, that instead of waiting for someone to solve the problem are actually going, hang on a second, it's my data, it's my environment, I'm going to solve this problem for myself. And I think that that ties into data ethics a lot because we're seeing the awareness of consumers out there on the rise. So Forrester have done like really good research between 2017 and 2021 actually to see how the awareness of how data is used for each consumer is rising. And it really is rising, and consumers are becoming more aware of how data is being used and why. And the most important thing, I think the most fundamental thing that a publisher or marketer can do to show the respect and appreciation for their users' loyalty is to take control of their privacy and their own data and treat it in a way that they know is fair and that they know aligns with their policy. So publishers are doing this 100%. Everyone's taking a slightly different approach to it. But the important thing here is that we're not all waiting for someone else to come and solve this problem. We're proactively solving it together. And I think that's really, really exciting today.
Brilliant. I have so much more to ask you, but we're completely out of time, unfortunately. But Femi and Alice, just quickly, from the marketer perspective, do you think that the fragmentation we're seeing in the industry at the moment, and what's happening with the likes of Google and Meta versus all the options out there, do you think that this represents a great opportunity for marketers in terms of data strategy and data infrastructure?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that to Marika's point about being able to be the sort of master of your own destiny, if in partnerships with brands, we're able to work out our own approach to data strategy and measurement and have a real conversation at quite senior levels about what we believe to be the most important factors to delivering our bottom line, then that's opening up this sort of can of worms that actually needs to be talked about rather than accepting all of these things in the market to be true. So if that is what is going to come out of this conversation, I think it's a great opportunity and that people should be taking it with both hands and really delving in deep.
Brilliant.
Go on,
Femi, very quickly.
I would agree. I think that agencies have had a reckoning with margins and transparency.
Absolutely.
Publishers have had a reckoning with transparency. Brands need to have their reckoning, and that's the time right now.
Fantastic. What a great way to end. Thank you so much to Moraka, Femi, Alice, and Paul. Give them a hand. Thank you very much.